Only a couple of years ago, relations between China and India were in the dumps. On top of long-standing issues over the border and China's close relationship with Pakistan, there were renewed tensions over India's strategic cooperation with the Biden administration and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's overtures towards Taiwan. However, in recent months, it looks like Sino-Indian relations have quietly started improving. There's been a flurry of diplomatic activity, with Indian officials announcing on Wednesday that Modi would travel to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Summit later this month, his first visit to China since 2018. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how Sino-Indian relations have progressed, and what might be motivating this apparent pivot. Have you ever wondered how much money TLDR makes each year, or who's funding our journalism? Well, we think that transparency is super important, so we answer both questions in our recent video. It's linked in the description. So let's start with a bit of context. Sino-Indian relations have always been strained by two things: an ongoing border dispute and China's close relationship with Pakistan. When it comes to the border dispute, China and India disagree over the territorial status of Aksai Chin, an area administered by China as part of Xinjiang, and Arunachal Pradesh, an area administered by India. Now, the two sides have fought multiple wars over this border, including most notably the Sino-Indian War of 1962. There have been multiple skirmishes more recently, but in 1996, the two sides signed an agreement banning military weapons and explosives along the border, which means that today the skirmishes are fought with improvised weapons like iron rods or barbed bats. India also doesn't like China's close relationship with Pakistan. For context, China and Pakistan have enjoyed a remarkably friendly relationship ever since they established diplomatic ties in 1951, when Pakistan became one of the first countries to sever relations with the ROC government in Taiwan in favor of the PRC. China provides Pakistan with significant amounts of military and economic assistance, while Pakistan has been one of China's staunchest diplomatic allies, providing support over issues like Xinjiang, Tibet, and Taiwan. And the CCP have long dreamt of building an oil pipeline through Pakistan to resolve their dependence on vulnerable maritime imports. However, the main motivation for both countries is that the relationship acts as a geopolitical hedge against India, something India is understandably uncomfortable with. A few years ago, it looked like Sino-Indian relations were on the up. Sino-Indian relations arguably peaked in early 2015, when bilateral trade was ballooning, and both sides were engaged in a diplomatic charm offensive after Modi's first election. At the time, Pew polling suggested that Indians had the most positive views of China of basically any large country. However, Sino-Indian relations collapsed in the latter half of the 2010s, and continued deteriorating into the 2020s. This is in part due to an uptick in violence along the border, but also because during that time, there was a widespread perception in China and elsewhere that India was moving closer to the US. The Biden administration made a real effort to bring India on side as part of its containment strategy against China, which essentially involved building a network of alliances in Asia. And India does share many of the US's concerns about its over-reliance on Chinese manufacturing. For context, India imports significantly more from China than it exports, and India's exports are mostly stuff like food and primary goods, while China's exports are more high-tech manufactured goods like phones, solar panels, and electric vehicles. India also took steps to extricate itself from China economically after the border clashes in 2020, when Modi's government responded to Beijing's attempt to unilaterally change the status quo on the line of actual control by banning hundreds of Chinese apps, including TikTok, and restricting Chinese investment in India. Under Modi, India is also getting more interested in industrial policy, but this puts it in implicit competition with China economically, because industrial policy usually focuses on developing manufacturing industries that China often dominates. To this end, Modi tried to improve relations with Taiwan, inviting TSMC to build a chip-making plant in its home state of Gujarat, and congratulating Taiwan's president Lai Ching-te on his election last year. While India officially adheres to Beijing's One China policy, and Modi conspicuously refrained from using the words Taiwan or president, this was still enough to provoke an angry reaction from the CCP. China's foreign ministry warned that Modi's comments were a violation of the One China policy and insisted that India was obligated to resist the Taiwan authorities' political calculations. However, in recent months, it looks like India has pushed for somewhat of a rapprochement. There's been a flurry of diplomatic activity, with the National Security Advisor, Defense Minister, Foreign Secretary, and External Affairs Minister all visiting China in the last 6 months. Modi himself is due in Beijing later this year, having met with Xi for the first time in 5 years on the sidelines of last year's BRICS summit. Furthermore, the diplomatic language has been conspicuously friendly. Each of those trips culminated in a pledge to normalize relations, and India refrained from criticizing China during the recent skirmishes with Pakistan, despite the fact that China reportedly provided Pakistan with military intelligence, and most of Pakistan's military hardware comes from China. India's language over the border conflict also seems to have softened. During the External Affairs Minister's visit to Beijing last month, he avoided using the phrase "return to the status quo ante," the boilerplate phrase used by Indian officials since 2020, and instead praised a positive trajectory in bilateral ties, despite the fact that only a few days earlier, China had taken the controversial step of renaming a number of places within the disputed territories. So what's motivating this pivot? Well, we can see at least 2 reasons. The first is economic. As the global economy stalls, Indian officials might have decided that mending economic ties with China is necessary to offset any slowdown. The Indian finance minister recently indicated that the country will be open to relaxing capital restrictions on Chinese investments in India, and the government's lead economic think tank has also reportedly made the case for allowing Chinese entities to acquire larger stakes in Indian companies to encourage Chinese firms, especially in high-tech sectors, to set up shop in India. India might also have realized that China has the upper hand in any trade war, as was made evident earlier this year when China restricted the export of rare earth minerals, fertilizer, and certain machinery to India, provoking anxiety in the Indian business community. The second reason, though, is Trump. As we detailed in a previous video, Trump has had a dramatic falling out with Modi recently. Only a couple of days ago, the US imposed a 50% tariff on Indian exports, with Modi responding on Thursday that he would, quote, never compromise with Trump. Without American backing, India is less confident in taking such an assertive stance against China. At the same time, Trump has made overtures towards Pakistan, irritating both India, which sees Trump's pivot as a strategic betrayal, and China, which suspects that Trump is trying to peel Pakistan away from China. India presumably sees an opportunity to exploit cracks in the China-Pakistan alliance and potentially build a new anti-America axis with China and others. Everything we've discussed in today's video plays into a broader sense of uncertainty in the world at the moment. And who's so often at the middle of all of that? Well, the United States. So in the next issue of our magazine, Too Long, we're discussing this geopolitical shift and whether we're currently observing the end of the American order. In that section, we discuss everything from the collapse of democratic norms in the US, to the decline of American soft power, to issues with the US economy, or the battle for universities, before discussing who could potentially take over in a post-American world. So if you want to find out what we really think, now's your chance. It's not just the US though. This issue is our longest ever at 78 pages, full of our very best journalism and analysis. So we also get into why Germany's military might is growing, if Farage could become the UK's next Prime Minister, why countries are outsourcing their migrants, why the global order is collapsing with Professor James Kerr-Lindsay, and why leaders like Putin and Netanyahu seem to be getting away with it. The magazine has now officially been published, so if you order a copy today, we'll ship it as soon as we can. Or if you select the digital edition, we'll send a digital version of Too Long straight to your inbox. Plus, if you want the very best deal, you should make sure you subscribe to Too Long. That way, not only do you get every issue going forward, but you'll also get 20% off every copy as long as you're a member. On top of that, this week only, if you use code LASTCHANCE20, you'll get an additional 20% off this copy, bringing down the cost from £9.99 to £6.40 for the digital edition, or £13.99 to £8.96 for the physical edition. This really is your last chance too. From next month, all new subscribers won't receive this issue of Too Long, instead having to wait until December's The New Middle East issue. So if you want the reduced subscriber pricing on this issue, this really is your last chance. As we outlined in our recent video on TLDR's finances, TLDR actually made a loss last year, and too long is a big part of our plan to make TLDR profitable in 2025 in order to continue funding the free videos that we make every day. So if you want to be part of that, then head to toolong.news and subscribe today.